This is episode 79 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his third appearance on the podcast. He's a contributor to heavyhockey.com, Post Cologne. Post, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to having you back on the podcast. And as I mentioned, you're one of the newest members here at the Heavy Hockey Network, and you wrote an article on your 2023-24 NHL standings predictions back in October, which will also tie into what we'll be talking about tonight. But first, I just want to know, how's your experience been since joining the Heavy Hockey team and getting to know the rest of the guys a bit?
It's been really positive. It's good to see a group of people as passionate as I am about the Oilers and the NHL in general. And I'm really enjoying my time so far.
That's awesome, man. And we definitely have a great group of writers and podcast hosts here at the Heavy Hockey Network, yourself included. And, I look forward to reading more articles from you this season.
Yeah, I have a few ideas that I've been speculating on, but my latest one I wanted to do about the Oilers' reasons for starting slow has already become out of date. So they keep you on your toes.
That's probably a good reason for an article to get canceled, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you have any other teaser that you can pass out quickly of just something that you might be interested in looking into a little more?
Not to beat a dead horse, but I know we're going to talk about Jay Woodcroft later in the podcast, but I'm curious to dig in a little deeper on the numbers that Knobloch has had, and maybe one of Woodcroft's better stretches. Taking a sample size of maybe his best 12-game sample size versus Knobloch's latest to see how they compare. But that's something that could be evaluated down the road, maybe after the entire season as well.
For sure. And just off the top of my head, the Oilers ended last season on a 14-0-1 run. So Woodcroft Knobloch hasn't quite reached a 15-game unbeaten streak in regulation, but definitely this run has been one of the best in the McDavid era for sure.
Yeah, I think they finished the regular season 18-2-1 or something like that. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
And including their first-round series against the Kings, the Oilers went 21 straight games without a regulation loss last year.
I think that's considered good.
Yeah, that's very good, and it's a shame how that series ended against Vegas in the second round, because they were right with them through 4 games, tied 2-2, and it could have been anyone's series. And I don't know about you, but I really believe that if the Oilers would have got past Vegas, that neither Dallas or Florida would have stopped them.
I agree. I think the Oilers were probably the Stanley Cup favorite amongst those 3 teams had they advanced.
Yeah, it was. It doesn't always happen, but that second round series, in my opinion, was the true Stanley Cup final last year.
I couldn't agree more.
And Post, the Edmonton Oilers are currently the hottest team in the NHL. They beat the Chicago Blackhawks 4-1 at Rogers Place last night to extend their winning streak to a league best 8 games, and they are now just one win away, I should say, from matching the franchise record for longest winning streak, which was set back in 2001 and equaled last season. But before we get into that, let's just go back to the start of training camp. Expectations were extremely high for this club coming into the 2023-24 season, and rightfully so. As we just talked about, the Oilers were coming off a 109-point season and gave the eventual Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights their toughest series in the playoffs last spring. I picked the Oilers to finish first in the Pacific Division during my season preview podcast back in October. I know you picked them to win the division as well in your article. However, they fell flat on their face out of the gate with an embarrassing 8-1 loss to one of their biggest rivals in the season opener. And things just continued to get worse from there, winning just 2 of their first 12 games and sitting second last in the NHL standings in early November. Post, following that terrible 2-9-1 start, were you beginning to think that this team wasn't as good as we originally thought? Or did you think it was just a matter of time until they got back on track?
I won't lie. I had a bit of a crisis of faith about this team, especially after picking them to win the division by a small margin, but still I thought they were worthy of doing that. I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me in the first 12, 14 games of the season that caused me to have my doubts was the ineffectiveness of the bottom six. I think Bob Stauffer had mentioned that a couple of times as well, where the dynamic was, as is usually the case, they don't provide a great deal of offense. I think even right now, the Oilers are 31st or 32nd maybe in terms of the percentage of team goals coming from their bottom six forwards. And also, this is when Sam Gagner was in the American Hockey League and Raphael Lavoie spent a bit of time with the team, and there was a lot of flux and almost no production. That's changed of late, but that's a big reason why I was really starting to have some doubts about the Oilers as a whole. Obviously, the Jack Campbell situation was weighing heavily on everybody, fans, the organization, and I'm sure the core members of the team. So I can't say that I'm back yet. My guard is still up about this team, but yeah, the doubts were very prevalent.
Yeah, and you definitely weren't alone there. And I mean, when I look at this team on paper and the areas of strength and weaknesses, scoring goals is definitely not a weakness for this club. They scored 325 goals last season, which was the second most by a team in the 21st century, I believe, behind only the Florida Panthers 2 years ago. So they have this elite offensive connection up front, arguably the best top six in the league. And when you have that much firepower in your top six, I think that it can overcome maybe some scoring deficiencies in the bottom six. So that wasn't like a big concern for me. But you're on Oilers Twitter, I am as well. There was obviously panic in the fan base when they only had, like I said, 2 wins through their first 12 games. And you were starting to see some people say things like, this is the beginning of the end of the McDavid era in Edmonton, or if they fall and crater in a cup or bust season, don't expect any of the big guys to be back next year. Did you ever reach that level of panic, or did you feel like, regardless of this tough stretch, that there would at least be something to hope for going forward? Like it wasn't like the beginning of the end as maybe some people thought it could be.
I mean, you want to stay rational and say that, once we reach the quarter and half mark point of the season, that we can reevaluate then. But I think being a fan is inherently an irrational thing. Those thoughts do go through your head.
Yeah. It's short for fanatic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because it's something that I'm aware of and that I do think about. I can't say that I was fully on board of being definitively in the camp of, the entire era hinges on these next 20 games. I think that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but, I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't something that crossed my mind.
For sure. And I mean, if you look at this team, they've been a good team in the NHL since 2019-20. For 4 consecutive years, they finished second in their division. 3 times in the Pacific Division and once in the All-Canadian Division during the pandemic. But they have had a tough stretch in each of those 4 years that they've somehow managed to overcome. And they've historically been a very strong second half team in the McDavid era. So I looked at it as like, well, they had that awful 2-11-2 run 2 years ago, and the Oilers made it to the conference final. Last year, they were barely clinging to a wild card spot in early January, and they only had 5 regulation losses in the second half of the season, and were 1 win away from finishing first place in the Western Conference. So that gave me a lot of not just hope, but I had faith, like confidence, I should say, that this team was much better than their record showed, and that they would be able to get back to that level. It's just, if they're going to have a rough patch, let's get it out of the way early. It obviously went on a lot longer than we would have expected it to, especially, in a year where you are expected to be competing for a Stanley Cup. And it wasn't just Oilers fans who were saying that this is a legit Stanley Cup contender. Across the league, they were viewed as one of the favorites to win the Cup. Like, as I said, they were just, if they would have had 2 more points last year, they would have tied Vegas, and they had the tiebreaker. So they would have ended up not only winning the Pacific Division, but the the Western Conference regular season titles as well. They have the two best players in the league in their primes. They brought back virtually their entire core from last year too. And even the team showed up 2 weeks ahead of training camp for captain skates. And if you looked at their schedule, the Oilers had 8 of their first 12 games against teams that didn't make the playoffs. So everything was basically lining up for them to have a great start to the season, but the Stars weren't scoring. The power play went cold. They couldn't get a save. And simply put, they just had some bad luck. So, that all kind of culminated into one of the worst starts in franchise history.
Yeah, I think that's something that Oilers fans are maybe more accustomed to than they should be. If we do bounce back and we make the playoffs, this will be the 3rd consecutive season that we have a borderline miracle take place. Mm-hmm. And the year that Woodcroft took over for Dave Tippett, the Oilers were, I think, in late January, they were 2 games above 500, second last in their division. And then we saw what happened last season, where they had a second half for the ages. So I think that's really the touchstone that I'm taking away from this team is they have this almost superhuman ability to go through stretches of extreme success and extreme droughts. So I don't know.
Right.
It's hard to understand a roster like this that goes through these ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there too. But are they going to be able to get to 100 points for the 3rd consecutive season this year? Maybe not. But when you look at the teams in the West that they're competing with for playoff spots, I mean, I think right now the projected cut line in the West is 85 points. Well, I'm confident the Oilers are going to sail past that. I'm sure they're still going to finish in the 90s, and perhaps they do even get close to 100 if they are able to have another one of those incredible second halves to the season where they only lose single digits in regulation games. But despite how good Vegas, LA, and Vancouver have looked early on the season, do you think that the Oilers can climb into a top 3 spot in the Pacific still, or are you thinking that if they do get in, that it's more likely going to be in a wild card spot this year?
I do think they're a wild card team because simply they don't control their own destiny. I have in pencil right now Vancouver, LA, and Vegas in those top 3 spots. Not to say that the Oilers can't. Just a second ago, I talked about how they're prone for these miraculous comebacks, but it's just the gap between them and Vancouver, who I do think will be the 3rd team in the Pacific, is so great. And they've already, gone on an 8-game winning streak. It's not something that you can sustain, for 20, 30 games at a time. But honestly, I don't think there's a big difference or a motivation to crack the top 3, because whether you're a wild card team or
you have to go through Pacific, 2 difficult teams to get to the conference final anyway.
Exactly. You're probably, if they expend all their energy fighting for 3rd place, they're going to play the Los Angeles Kings in all likelihood. And if you finish in a wild card spot, you're going to
play Vegas.
Vegas or Dallas or Colorado.
Right.
So there's really no easy path unless you finish first in the Pacific. And I think it's safe to say that ship has sailed.
It's very likely they're going to play an elite team in the first round anyway. So as long as they get in, I mean, I'm looking at the teams that they're battling with right now, Arizona and Nashville. I don't know. I'm pretty confident the Oilers are going to finish ahead of both of those clubs. Neither one of them really scare me. I know that the Coyotes are a team on the rise, but realistically, the Oilers have significantly more skill than them, and they shouldn't be competing for the same point totals by the time we're at the 3-quarter mark of the season. So we'll check back in maybe 40 games and see where things are at. But looking at this right now, it's like you said, they're going to run into either Colorado or Dallas or maybe Vegas, who seems to be running away with the Pacific. But I mean, that's a huge confidence boost too. If you get into the playoffs and you knock off the Golden Knights in round 1, I mean, you might be able to ride that wave of momentum through the rest of the spring.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like you mentioned earlier in the pod, how Vegas was our Stanley Cup final in the second round. And I guess it's just happening one round earlier than it did last season. And it really does seem like they're on a collision course. I do believe the Oilers are the best team in the wild card race. and Vegas is primed to probably win the West, which means that there's a really, really high chance that they will meet in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, the Oilers have owned Vegas in the regular season over the past couple of years, and they did beat them twice in the playoffs last year. Both wins were fairly convincing, but, of course, it was still a 4-2 series loss. So Vegas has the bragging rights, but I know the Oilers would be overwhelming underdogs going into that series, but I don't know. I'm not as scared of Vegas because I know that this team has shown that they can beat them. It's just a matter of can they beat them 4 out of 7.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Obviously, the PTSD about the Golden Knights last year is fresh in Oilers fans' minds. But yeah, I do think that they're a beatable team, even though they brought back almost the entire roster from last season. The Oilers, I don't think will look the way they do today on game 83.
No. I mean, look, I don't want this to turn into a Ken Holland bashing segment. I mean, if you want to go off on it, like, by all means, but like, I think that there would be a lot of frustration in the fan base, even more so if he didn't trade the first round pick at the deadline. I mean, you have to, in an all-in year with McDavid and Draisaitl, take that pick and turn it into a player who can help you, even if it's for 2 or 3 months this spring.
Exactly. I mean, the stage that the Oilers are at in the life cycle as a Stanley Cup contender kind of reminds me of Pittsburgh during the mid-2010s. Is you really can't afford to focus on drafting and developing. You have to go for it every single year. Mm-hmm. Except we don't have the safety net of having a Stanley Cup in on the team's resume. So yeah, the added pressure is even greater.
And I mean, you look at like last year, probably other than Matthias Ekholm, who was their biggest trade deadline acquisition, the second biggest would have been Nick Bjugstad. And I thought that he was a very useful third line center for them for the short time that he was in Edmonton. And there were some people like we said, on Oilers Twitter who were upset with the fact that Michael Kesselring was included in that deal. And like, yes, he took a big step forward in Bakersfield last year, right shot defenseman, 6th round pick who is finally starting to kind of push for being an NHL ready player after, 5 years. I would have liked to obviously hold on to that player, but when you're in a year where you think that you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup and the Oilers are pushing to finish first in the Western Conference, I'm not as concerned with holding on to that defenseman when you can bring in a piece like Bjugstad, who turned out to be like a really good deadline acquisition.
Yeah, honestly, losing Bjugstad and Costin is a key thing to identify in terms of why the Oilers have struggled a little bit a lot actually to come out.
Who do you think was a bigger loss
between Bjugstad and Costin? Yeah. That's a really difficult question. I want to say Bjugstad, as much as Costin was a fan favorite and he provided an element of physicality and clutch goal scoring at times that is a bit more flashy. What Bjugstad did was understated, kind of like eating your vegetables, to use the example in terms of a hockey team. Wins faceoffs, plays quiet minutes.
He's huge, enormous frame.
I think he's, 6'4", 6'5"?
6'6".
He's 6'6". Yeah. He's kind of the ideal third line center, especially for a team like this. To lose him,
tip pucks. I mean, like he scored some big goals for the Oilers down that stretch. So I know he took $2 million and the Oilers apparently offered him $1 million. And I guess it's hard to make a case that he made the wrong decision at this point, since the Coyotes and Oilers are sort of equal in the standings. But I mean, if we're being real, the Oilers are a better team and should be much higher in the standings. So I still think, Bjugstad, if you would have just taken a little less to be a part of a contending team, but obviously he had to do what he thought was best for him. And I guess I was also a little surprised because he made pretty good money in Florida earlier in his career. So I thought that at age 30, maybe trying to maximize your dollars wouldn't be priority number one. It would be getting a ring.
Yeah, I mean, he's already secured the bag. I don't really understand his decision making either, especially signing with Arizona.
Made like 24 mil in Florida over 6 years, I think. So it's like you're right now you're in the prime of your career, and you're choosing to go back to a Coyotes team that they're on the up and up, but the Oilers are pushing for something right now, man. And apparently he really enjoyed his time here. So I was surprised that he didn't stay.
I don't understand his decision whatsoever, but yeah.
Like, can you imagine him on the third line right now and maybe Ryan McLeod down on the fourth line?
Well, I mean,
like
Jay
how
McCraw
different
will still be the coach of his team.
Yeah. You're probably right there. But it's a tough one, but still, that was one player that I think was a tough loss for the Oilers.
Absolutely.
And while it's hard to say that there was one specific player or thing that was entirely responsible for the Oilers' early struggles, Jack Campbell was undoubtedly probably at the top of the list of players who received criticism from the fan base for his abysmal goaltending. I guess there's no other way to put it. And I'm not someone who likes to pile on the players. I'm a very optimistic, supportive fan, and I was cheering for Jack Campbell to have the redemption year, but it just seemed like he couldn't get his game on track after a pretty good showing in the preseason. It just all seemed to fall apart again in the regular season. He posted some of the worst numbers in the league through 5 appearances until he was eventually placed on waivers and sent down to the AHL's Bakersfield Condors. Like I said, Post, I don't want to pile on Campbell too much here, but it reached a point where he was unplayable at the NHL level, wasn't he?
He was, and it's really unfortunate because he's such a great person and a guy you want to cheer for. To see him struggle like this, not just as an Oilers fan. It's difficult to watch this on a human level, to see his confidence wane the way it does and the self-deprecating that's kind of taken a backseat this year, especially compared to last. I can't recall seeing a starting goaltender join a contending team like this and then have such a precipitous drop off. This is kind of a first.
And the other thing is too, it's all mental, right? I mean, if you think about it, he was an American prodigy goalie as a teenager. 3 straight years, he was the starting goaltender for Team USA at the World Juniors in 2010, 2011, and 2012, including winning a gold medal in my hometown of Saskatoon in 2010, which denied Canada a 6th straight gold medal at the tournament. This guy has won every level up until he got to the pro level, and it just seemed like he wasn't able to put everything together. Obviously, like you said, confidence and mental stability, just not being able to shake off a bad goal, just letting it eat at him. I don't know if a sports psychologist was able to really help him in the offseason or not with that, but it just, you see even some of the highlights of him down in Bakersfield, letting in kind of like a long-range wrister that any pro goalie shouldn't have too much trouble with from the top of the circle. It's just like, man, he had 3 straight solid games down there, and then he'd have 2 bad ones in a row. And it's just like, you need to see consistent, strong play at that level to have any confidence in bringing him back up to the NHL, because the Oilers need points in the standings so badly. And to bring him back up and give him another opportunity when every game means so much, I don't know. To me, it's just a very risky decision. So I don't know what they're going to do, but with what we've seen as of late, and we'll get into that, a little more of that later. I want to stick with Campbell for now. I don't know how they could, because of the situation the team's put themselves in, be able to give him another chance anytime soon.
Well, I won't name names, but there was a well-known local pundit who did say that he believes Jack Campbell will spend the rest of the season in Bakersfield, and then one way or another he'll be moved in the summer. And he felt pretty confident in that prognostication. So based on that, I don't think that this is the kind of person who would say that.
There's some bottom feeders with cap space too, right? So there's got to be someone who can afford to take on his deal. I mean, you'd think that a team like San Jose, who's actively trying to be bad to get another high draft pick this year and maybe for the next few years, like they are years away from being competitive. Would it really be a big deal to them to have Jack Campbell on the books for the next 3 years when they're not anticipating making the playoffs in any of those years anyway?
That's definitely a team you can identify to be a dance partner, but I do think that they will weaponize cap space and they'll try to get something of value out of the Oilers, whether it be a Lavoie or maybe a Bourgault. I think the price to get rid of his contract, knowing where the Oilers are, like I said, in their Stanley Cup life cycle, will be great, no matter which team ends up taking on his contract.
I mean, we saw Mackenzie Blackwood goalie the Oilers just over a month ago when the Oilers went down to San Jose. And I'm not saying that he is the be-all, end-all in net, but I think that if you look at it a few years ago, how highly thought of he was as an up-and-coming goaltender, he might be able to give the Oilers steady enough goaltending in a return for Jack Campbell that if the Oilers gave the Sharks Campbell and a sweetener for Blackwood, that could be a potential deal that maybe we could see happen.
Yeah, I do think that's possible. It's just a matter of how sweet is sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
The cupboards are pretty bare, and rightfully so, because I don't fault Ken Holland for going in and spending assets like in the Ekholm trade. His name is escaping me. Reed Schaefer. Yeah. Like we've traded players to improve the roster that exists, and I don't know who do we really have outside of Xavier Bourgault to really interest them outside of maybe the first round pick.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. You only have one first round pick this year, so you want to make sure that when you trade that, it's for the most important area you need to address in your roster. If the Sharks were willing to do Campbell and the Oilers' first round pick for Blackwood, would you do that trade knowing that now they don't have that first to use at the deadline?
Yeah, so essentially what you're asking is, what do I value more, addition by addition or addition by subtraction?
Well, that they can't bring it. Basically, then they can't bring in a third line center that they want, or if they do, they're going to have to use a prospect or a pick that's not the first rounder. Maybe you have to attach a second and a B-level prospect to address another area in need. But obviously, if you're trying to have that home run rental at the deadline, the first round pick is what is going to get you that. So I guess I'm saying is it worth giving up the first round pick to get out of the Campbell contract and bring in Blackwood?
I want to lean yes, simply due to the fact that Mackenzie Blackwood makes a shade under $2.5 million, and then maybe if you can get them to retain a little bit on Campbell, which really won't have an effect on their rebuild whatsoever. Maybe you can have a bit of a both and situation, where you can still maybe add a bottom six forward. You're not going to get a player on the level of Bjugstad. But it just means that your deadline acquisition, your options will be severely reduced.
And just before we move off of that, I mean, who knows what everything's going to look like in late February when the trade deadline rolls around. But would you explore bringing Bjugstad back again?
Absolutely.
If the Coyotes were willing to deal him again. Because he signed for next year, too, at $2 million, I believe, as well. So the Coyotes would have to take some money as well to make him fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's I don't want to call him the missing ingredient. But,
you know what you're getting though. Like this is it's a rental that he fits with the team. You know that he enjoyed being in Edmonton. Obviously, it'd be kind of strange to see a player go from Arizona to Edmonton to Arizona to Edmonton, but I mean, he's already got the money regardless of whether he plays in Phoenix or Edmonton. So I don't know. I don't know if he'd be at the top of their list of players that they'd be interested in bringing in, but I don't know. I would at least make the call to the Coyotes and see what the cost would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a matter of, like you said, Arizona's interest. I mean, they have young players on their roster that they're looking to shepherd and shelter a little bit. So losing a player like that, who's really a top 6 forward on their team, that would maybe have a negative effect on their player development. But if it was make it worth their while, I think it's something that we should strongly consider, because again, a cup or bust. It's not an exaggeration, but like the Oilers really need to make some playoff headway this season. So yeah, if they can make that happen, then I would move heaven and earth to add Bukestad to this roster.
And one lone bright spot in the Oilers' first 6 weeks of the season was the 2023 Heritage Classic at Commonwealth Stadium. I think it was easily the most significant battle of Alberta since the 2022 playoffs. And once again, the Oilers were victorious, beating their provincial rivals 5-2. Post, the last time I had you on the podcast was back in January, when the event had just recently been announced about a month before, and you and I were speculating on which former Oilers players might be playing in the alumni game. And I remember you said that you were hoping to see the Ryan Smith-led Oilers versus the Jerome McGinley-led Flames. And ultimately, they chose not to have an alumni game at all. Instead, there was a pregame ceremony to commemorate several of the players and coaches from the inaugural Heritage Classic 20 years ago. But in your opinion, was an alumni game the one thing that was missing from an otherwise great weekend for Oilers fans back in late October?
Yes. I would say it's the primary reason why I didn't rush to go to the event. That and the $2,000-$3,000 tickets.
I can tell you I found tickets for cheaper than that. But
yeah, I mean, I'm sure they were available, but the sight lines from the very, very top of the building were maybe not the best, but yeah, I do think it was a really big missed opportunity. And these outdoor games are more so local events, I think, than they are league events. So to not have an alumni game, I think, was a big missed opportunity. And I really do hope that it's not, it has nothing to do with the fact that a lot of guys who would be in the game are executives, based on the fact that Mark Messier was a literal New York Ranger and asked for leave to play in 2003. So I think that excuse is invalid.
Yeah, and he was already like 43 years old too. So it just shows the legacy of that player. I mean, to play in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s in the NHL, just incredible. And I do think it would have been really cool though, because, and like you said, it is maybe more of a regional event. I'm not sure how much Vegas and Seattle playing at the Mariners Park on New Year's Day is going to interest fans across the league. So, yes, obviously the Oilers have Connor McDavid, and that's a huge draw. Leon Draisaitl, two of the best players in the league. But does Edmonton and Calgary playing on a Sunday night when Sunday Night Football is on, is that going to capture the attention of an American audience?
I thought that was very strange. And let's not get ourselves. The NHL is not exactly an expert when it comes to marketing themselves.
Well, it was 5 p.m. local time, right? So that would be 7 p.m. Eastern time. I was fully dialed into the Heritage Classic that weekend, but Sunday Night Football must have been starting right around that time.
Yeah, I mean, the NHL goes to great pains to avoid the NFL at times, but to not sidestep them for a marquee event like this, I thought was strange. But if you're looking for consistency, this isn't the league for you.
I mean, a great game, though. And like I said, I actually paid less for my ticket to the Heritage Classic than I did for game one of the playoff series between the Oilers and Kings a year ago. So that was nice to find a ticket. I got it back in June when they first came on sale. And I asked a few people, and not everyone was ready to commit to it about 5 months before the event. So I just kind of had to say, well, I'm probably going to go alone. And that was completely fine. I was sitting around mostly Oilers fans, so it made for an awesome event. And I had a chance to go to the one in Winnipeg 7 years ago as well. I think Winnipeg did a fantastic job hosting that. I'll give them credit. But yeah, it was something that I think that it would have been great if they turned it into a full weekend. And I know the Oilers did a lot of interactive things around Rogers Place with former players there and different things for kids and families. But I think that having that alumni game on the Saturday, the day before the actual regular season game really would have made it an awesome weekend. That way you get to go to the stadium twice. There isn't as much pressure the first day because you're just going to see some old childhood favorites of yours. Like I wanted to see Ryan Smith and Alish Hemsky out there. I thought maybe this is the one opportunity we'll get to see Chris Pronger back in an Oilers jersey. So yeah, that would have been a cool thing, I think, if they would have done it.
Yeah, the event, I don't want to sound like I'm negative on it. It was great for the league. Ultimately, it was good to see McDavid make a surprise appearance. It had its drama. The game was, it was one of our few, nearly 60-minute efforts in the first number of games of the season. I really do hope that we can see another outdoor game. With Connor McDavid, maybe in Edmonton or maybe in Calgary would be fine.
And the other thing, I don't think that Calgary is getting another outdoor game until they have a new football stadium. They did play one in 2011 there, but I don't know if you've ever been to McMahon Stadium, but there is no way that the NHL will put another outdoor game in that city until they have an upgraded facility.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And that's not even me just being like, don't get me wrong, I am a Flames hater, but that's not even me in this instance trying to dump on the Flames. It is truly a terrible stadium. I mean, it was built in 1960. There's been minimal updates to it. So I would say that for the city of Calgary to have another game, like really both of their football stadium and hockey arena need to have huge improvements.
And with city money and provincial money, for that matter, going towards the replacement for the Saddle Dome, which I think is about 40 feet north of the existing arena, that'll deter funds and political sway that would have been spent maybe on a replacement for McMahon. So it's probably quite a ways away.
Yeah, and I mean, like it's the university stadium too, right? So I don't know if the city of Calgary does get another football stadium, I would assume that the Stampeders and the Dinos would share that as well. It just makes sense unless they think that for CIS football, McMahon Stadium is good enough for another number of decades. But I think that I even heard a couple years ago that they had this field house proposal that was going to have like the football stadium and the hockey arena right next to each other.
I heard that too. I think they wanted to make it a package deal. That's actually kind of a common thing that a lot of major cities want to have with their sports teams, but they very often don't end up working out.
Yeah. And just before we move on from the Heritage Classic, I know you're a jersey collector like myself, so give me your thoughts on the design of the Oilers Heritage Classic jersey, which obviously paid tribute to the Edmonton Mercury's from 1952. Do you have one? And if so, which player did you get?
I do have one. I have a Connor McDavid.
Of course.
And
got it.
Yeah, surprise. The jersey quality is really what strikes you when you first see it. The felt crest, felt numbers, and name kit really give it an old-timey feel. Like I was saying to you earlier, I think off mic, I'm a little bit concerned to see what Fanatics does in terms of the quality of numbered kits and crests. But this just shows what a great job Adidas has done with NHL uniforms. The design, I think, it wouldn't work as a primary or maybe even an alternate, but for what it is, for it to be an outdoor game, I think that it's effective and it's very high quality.
Yeah, I loved it. I'm going to get a McDavid as well. I thought about getting it on that trip. I'd already spent enough money for that one weekend in Edmonton. So between a hotel and driving from Saskatoon to Edmonton and meals. So I thought, I'll get it on my next trip out there. And plus, when I looked at some at Kingsway Mall, and Sports Closet was just swamped with people. And I usually like to get my jerseys at United Cycle anyway, so I'll probably stop through there and might even check out Pro Am Sports, see a few other places in town I've bought from them as well. But no, I love the jersey. I love the tribute. It was different too. Like, we haven't seen the Oilers go away from their classic crest very often in their history. I mean, they've changed the coloring, but other really than the oil gear logo back in 2001, the Todd McFarlane design, this is really the first time that the Oilers have went away from their classic crest at all in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I would say really outside of, say, Minnesota and Philadelphia, the Oilers are one of the teams who have had the least amount of variance with their primary crest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a new look. I think it's something that adds a lot of variety,
and it paid tribute to an Edmonton team from the past that isn't Oilers connected,
and that probably a lot of even Edmontonians have never heard of. So I think it's great to honor them, and I think the Edmonton Mercury's actually represented Canada at the Olympics in the 1950s,
and they won gold.
Yeah, so that's something that I think is worthy of honoring and commemorating. And sure. Calgary also had a team. I think they were called a hockey team called the Calgary Stampeders.
It was, back in the 60s. Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool that they had matching thematics and the off-white that everybody loves with these outdoor games.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and once again, this isn't just to make an Edmonton is better than Calgary thing, but I think legitimately, if you look at the two jerseys, the Edmonton one is nicer.
Marginally. I think they're both really sharp. I think what really sets the Oilers one apart for me is the leather-inspired coloring of the gloves and the pants and the goalie pads, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it really adds a nice touch.
Yeah, and I loved Stuart Skinner's design, kind of paying homage to Grant Fuhr with his 80s style goalie pads. What did you think of the inclusion of each player's individual number in the oil drop?
It makes a huge difference in terms of buying a blank versus buying a name and number jersey.
It fills it out for sure.
Yeah, I usually that doesn't matter to me. I often will buy blank jerseys because they're roughly $100 cheaper. But
exactly.
This is a jersey where you need to have a name and number.
And I mean, McDavid, great pick to go with. I believe he had 1 assist in the game. Would have been awesome to have him score. We're going to talk more about McDavid and the Heritage Classic coming up, or getting into the Heritage Classic, I should say. But no, it's an awesome jersey. I can't wait to add one to my collection, and we'll get to see it one more time this year because the Oilers are going to wear it on February 24th when the Battle of Alberta is back at Rogers Place, and that's the day before our Heavy Hockey Showdown charity game on the 25th. So a bunch of the guys from the Heavy Hockey team will all be there watching the game together, and then we'll have our charity game the next day. So at least you'll get to see it one more time worn this season.
And I believe the Oilers will see Calgary wear their Heritage jersey in the Saddle Dome this season as well.
Yeah, it would make sense to do that as well.
January 21st, I believe.
Yeah, it's a Hockey Night in Canada game in January.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, and as a result of the Oilers' horrible start, head coach Jay Woodcroft and assistant coach Dave Manson were both fired on November 13th and replaced with Chris Knobloch and Oilers legend Paul Coffey. Now, new CEO Jeff Jackson might have made this move in the offseason anyway, but after falling to the bottom of the standings, that probably caused Jackson to expedite the process. Post, did you think that the Oilers needed to make a coaching change, or would you prefer that they hold on to Woodcroft and bank on the players to eventually right the ship?
I'll be frank. I think the Oilers made a critical error firing Jay Woodcroft, and that's nothing against Knobloch. I think he's done a fine job. But I do say that I subscribe to the belief that Jay Woodcroft is one of the premier coaches in the NHL, and he'll be the belle of the ball this offseason to whichever team is lucky enough to have him.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally expect that he will be coaching in the NHL again next season. There'll be, I mean, we already saw St. Louis fire Berube yesterday, and I'm sure that there's going to be more coaching changes that will happen in the next 6 months. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes in to meet for multiple organizations, and I don't know, he, like you said, he might even have his pick of where he goes.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I recall correctly, the underlying numbers of Jay Woodcroft with this team were sensational. He has the highest winning percentage in franchise history. Granted, the sample size is a little bit smaller than some other coaches, but big enough to make a judgment. He, for a guy who's recognized as a typical player's coach, he wasn't always good cop. You've seen him. He's understated, but he can maybe lose his temper at times, and you saw it towards the end. He was a little bit snippy with a certain member of Sportsnet.
Yeah. He was actually kicked out of a game for arguing a call in Vancouver.
Exactly. So, when you think of a guy who's, a player's coach and jovial in the room and well liked, he doesn't meet all of those stereotypes. So I think that makes him a versatile coach. And I think that what we recognize best about him is he's an excellent communicator, probably the best communicator that I've seen be on this coaching staff or even in any executive role. That's what sticks out to me most about Jay Woodcroft.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that they were going to make the switch, I was disappointed because I really liked Jay. And I mean, I think that he won a place in Oilers fans' hearts very quickly. Like you mentioned a little earlier, he was the guy that came in and turned this team around late in the 2021-22 season. They had just lost a game in February to the Blackhawks, and it seemed like the playoffs might be slipping away, and then he came in and immediately turned everything around, and they got in and knocked off LA in the first round, knocked off Calgary in the second round, and had an epic moment, flinging the door open after McDavid's series-winning goal in overtime. And I don't know, he very quickly, like I said, sort of just jumped into that role of being a fan favorite, which you don't always see with coaches, because a lot of coaches haven't had a long stay in Edmonton, and eventually it turned out that he was another one of those. I mean, look how many coaches Nugent Hopkins has had in his career in 13 seasons. But yeah, it was a shame that the team's tough start cost him. And, you even heard player interviews where they basically said the same thing, that, we feel bad that, our lack of getting results cost two good guys their jobs. And it's a matter of the sport, though, right? And I'm sure that they'll both land as a package somewhere. I have a feeling Woodcroft will bring Manson along. Those two worked their way up through Bakersfield, and they'll find another spot. But yeah, it's just it's a shame that it didn't work out longer in Edmonton, because you looked at Woodcroft and it seemed like this is a guy who could have been the Oilers coach for a decade.
If we ultimately do end up winning the Stanley Cup, I'll be elated, but there will be a sense of sadness that he won't be involved. But
right,
I do think that it is a mistake, but hopefully we can persevere, and we'll see what we have with Chris Knobloch. But there's almost a period of mourning, like you said, because there's a sense of heroism with him saving our season in 21-22, and the epic moments with him in the playoffs, especially against Calgary. It's a loss.
And since Knobloch took over behind the bench, the Oilers have gone 11-3-0 and climbed to within 1 point of the final wildcard spot in the Western Conference. But when it was announced that the Oilers were hiring Connor McDavid's old junior coach, there was some noise from outside of Edmonton that McDavid is now running the organization. However, Knobloch was a qualified candidate for an NHL head coaching position. He had coached as an assistant in the NHL before and had won at virtually every level, winning championships in the WHL and the OHL before joining the Rangers farm team in Hartford, like I said, as well as spending 2 years on the Philadelphia Flyers staff. But McDavid also came out and rejected the notion that he had anything to do with the decision to bring him in. First, I just want to know what your thought was of the hire at the time, and have you noticed any major improvements under Knobloch that have helped turn this team season around?
The improvements are hard to ignore. I mean, this team has done a complete 180 since he's arrived. Now, is it correlation or causation? We'll never know. Could this have been done under Jay? And is it a matter of McDavid and Ekholm and others getting healthy? Yeah, probably. But I guess, what strikes me most under Coach Knobloch is the team's commitment to defense.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom how they could be so porous and then suddenly flip a switch. I'll give you an example. I was at the Rangers game earlier this season, and it had been a long time since I've seen a team, despite the score being relatively close, it was only 3-0, toy with another team. The Rangers were making cross crease seam passes, backhand, saucer passes for fun, like a hot knife through butter. And the Oilers were completely incapable of interrupting, a Harlem Globetrotter like offensive rush from the Rangers. And then now, Darnell Nurse is living up to his contract, or close to, in terms of his, playing every team's, best players.
I mean, he's looked fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And
I'm a big Darnell Nurse fan as it is. Like, I'll say that right now. And I know he takes a lot of heat in this market, and he's been a lightning rod for criticism. But I think even his biggest critic, if you look at him over the past month, you would say, like, wow, this looks like a guy who's earning every bit of his contract.
Exactly. People, just to touch on that for a second, they forget that the Oilers bridged him twice when he was more than willing to sign a long-term deal. And then,
he'd probably be a $7 million defenseman right now if they would have just signed him long-term on the previous deal.
He would. And then no one would, bat an eye at that, because that's the going rate for a top pairing defenseman, which he is. Mm-hmm. But I think because of, the lack of another true top pairing defenseman being on the team, for the first, couple years of his contract extension, that shone a light on him, because he was asked to play the toughest, minutes, the most amount of minutes. And, there wasn't a lot of help around him. And now with Ekholm, and a maturing Bouchard, and more team defense, I think, being prioritized under Knobloch, I think that, those are all ingredients that makes Nurse and the Oilers as a whole far more defensively competent.
For sure. And I read earlier today that under Knobloch, the Oilers have gone from a bottom 3 team in allowing rush chances to a top 3 team in the league in allowing rush chances. Now, like we said, it's even a smaller sample size than the one we were talking about from Woodcroft earlier, which at least spanned parts of 3 seasons. But if he's helped in any way cut down those chances against those like grade A chances where they're getting 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s, I mean, that's made such a difference to their goals against.
Yeah. I think last night against the Blackhawks, there was maybe one really dangerous odd man rush, and that's something they've cut down a lot lately. A lot of it, you would think would have to do with being the centerman, like the third player back on back checks, but it's really been a full team effort. I can't really explain it. If the same personnel just playing completely different, it's really hard to fathom.
And, like we said, there were some people who thought that the Oilers are just doing everything they can to appease McDavid by, bringing in a coach that he had when he was 15 in junior hockey. But McDavid even said, like, we've kept in touch here and there over the last 8 years, but it's not like they've been in regular contact since McDavid made the jump to the NHL in 2015. So the idea that this coaching change was done because McDavid requested it, like, that's wrong at all. Like he even came out and said in a media availability that the Oilers Jay Woodcroft had never lost the room, and that the Oilers were still playing for him, and that they didn't want to see him changed out. So you can kind of shut down those rumors right there. But I think it had more to do with that Knobloch has a good relationship with Jeff Jackson. And, when a new manager or CEO or head of hockey ops comes in, they're going to want to put their own guys in place. And Jeff Jackson, like we said, he has only been with the organization since August. And I know Jay Woodcroft did just sign an extension before he got there, but I wouldn't have been surprised even if they made the playoffs if and maybe let's say they lost in the second round again or something like that, that Jeff Jackson would have still made the coaching change in the summer because this was his guy. He wanted Knobloch in, and as I kind of already alluded to, like this is someone he wanted to get in there. It just the bad start to the season basically gave him an excuse to make the move sooner than he probably planned to.
I can only think, from McDavid's perspective, when he heard the news that Knobloch was brought in shortly after Jeff Jackson was made the CEO of the team, he was probably very annoyed. There must have been an eye roll thinking about what the narrative probably would be. And I think this, like you said, this is a matter of a relationship between Chris and Jeff.
But
and
he's
McDavid
not someone like LeBron.
Kind of,
like he's not the kind of guy who wants to be known as pulling the strings behind the scene. Like he is very much a team first guy, and I don't want any special treatment. I want to be one of the boys, and I think that that's another just quality to admire about him, that this is the best hockey player in the world by some margin, and he doesn't want any special treatment.
He's so unconcerned with anything that isn't hockey. I think he's made that very clear. It's almost difficult to get him to talk about other things, like we've not to denigrate his personality, but I think that a lot of times it's a bit of a struggle for him to deal with media or discuss himself.
Everyone's got different personalities too, and hockey players just by trade are more humble than a lot of other professional athletes, and they're basically, I think it might be a Canadian thing too, because I mean, we've grown up here. That from like a very young age, it's almost sort of ingrained in you to not be all about yourself and put the team first, and just always kind of be thankful and appreciative for everything. And it's not a sport where you're going to see a lot of larger than life, overly charismatic personalities like you might see in the NFL or the NBA.
Exactly. I mean, the players run the NBA. And then McDavid, especially even amongst hockey players, he's someone who tries to draw as little attention to himself as possible. So I think,
and maybe the league could use that. Like, I'm sure that, especially for the growth of hockey in the States, I'm sure that they would love for some of the players to become bigger draws, because like you said, that's what sells the game in the States. It's more so LeBron coming to town than the Cleveland Cavaliers when he was in his prime, right? And there are going to be those big team names. Like you look at the MLB, when the Yankees come to town, it doesn't matter who's on the Yankees. It's the Yankees. In the NBA, when the Lakers come to town, it's the Lakers. But for the most part, it's the big name stars that people come out to see. And I think the NHL has done a poor job of promoting its stars, especially through McDavid's career. They're already, I think, in the first year of Connor Bedard's career, doing a better job of marketing him than they did in the first several years of McDavid's career. But like you said, if he's not too overly concerned with that and getting his name out there, I mean, look, he was just inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame earlier this month. And he rushed back. He took the red-eye flight back because he wanted to be at practice the next day and not miss a day of practice. So that shows you how concerned he is about his team, that even in a weekend where he's being honored for his excellence as one of the youngest athletes to ever be inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame, he still wants to be there for his team the next day and not miss a day of work.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the premier athletes on the planet, if not the best athlete on the planet. And, like you pointed out about his profile league-wide, or honestly globally, it's kind of astonishing how anonymous he is relatively outside of Canada. And really, to put an emphasis on that, forgive the pronunciation, but NBA player Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was named Canada's Athlete of 2023 of the OKC Thunder. And I'm sorry, I'm sure he's great, and I don't really pay much attention to him. Mm-hmm. But to say that he had a better 2023 amongst Canadian athletes than McDavid's 153 point season, we got to start asking, what's the criteria here?
No, I know that he has had a great season, and I have some friends who follow the NBA a little closer than I do, and yes, he's probably pushing for top 5 player in the NBA, which, you know, from a Canadian perspective is great for the growth of the game. But you look at what McDavid's done. I have a good friend who really follows basketball, Brian Swain. He works for the Edmonton Elks. He formerly was with TSN 1260. And I asked him, is there anything comparable in the 21st century in basketball to what McDavid did in the NHL last year? And he said no. So for a guy like Brian, who is a hardcore NBA fan, for him to say that he can't think of one player, not LeBron, not Steph Curry, none of these guys, to have a season comparable to what McDavid did last year, that's a little surprising to me that he wasn't selected as Canada's Athlete of the Year. Although I will say I thought it was very cool that Shai wore a 1998 Team Canada Wayne Gretzky jersey to the ceremony, though.
That is a nice touch. And you know,
that
just
was
to
cool.
Clarify, nothing against him. It's
nothing
an amazing accomplishment. But yeah, I think, you know, maybe we're taking McDavid a little bit for granted.
Right. But yeah, I think that, and you never want to become numb to his greatness, right? And I think that because we watch him 90 plus times a year, including playoffs, we're just used to seeing this level of dominance night after night. And that's why it's so glaring when, you know, he was going on a cold streak early in the year, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, just to go back to Knoblauch now, I mean, that really has been, you know, a great addition for the team. Like it as bad as it was to lose Woodcroft, I think that Knoblauch has come in and he has exceeded expectations. He's turned this team around, much like Woodcroft did 2 years ago. I love how candid he is in interviews. He'll tell you what he's thinking. The team in general, in basically every area, has improved under him. So while it's only a 14-game sample size, you have to be impressed with what he's been able to do with this team so far.
Yeah, I think that it's, you know, you can't really ignore the results. 11-3-0, an 8-game winning streak, and they've really recovered their season from the brink of, you know, facing 3.5 months of a trudge towards a playoff miss. It's really remarkable what he's managed to do.
Without a doubt. And continuing on that, Paul Coffey, who was already working for the organization as special advisor to the owner in hockey operations, also stepped behind the bench as an assistant coach. So his first NHL coaching job comes at age 62, and the highest level of hockey he had previously coached was Junior A in Ontario. Post, what was your initial reaction when you heard that Coffey would be joining the coaching staff? And how much do you think his guidance has benefited the Oilers defenders over the past month?
My initial reaction was one of, oh, here we go. You know, a lot of Oilers fans are very sensitive to the nepotism that can exist in the organization. So I was sour on the personnel change, but it's hard to argue with early results. It's weird seeing someone who was one of the premier offensive defensemen in league history coincidentally be on the bench when we're experiencing somewhat of a defensive renaissance. So I don't really know how that's working. But I think you've really seen his influence benefit Evan Bouchard greatly in particular, who's I think third right now in scoring amongst defensemen in the NHL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the way I look at it is like, his D partner, Charlie Huddy, was the far less heralded player during his time in Edmonton, although he was inducted into the Oilers Hall of Fame back in November. So, you know, credit to him. But yeah, he never got the attention Coffey did. But following an almost 2-decade career as a player in the NHL, Huddy then went on to coach in the NHL for over 2 decades and was an assistant coach in Edmonton, Dallas, and Winnipeg. So usually the best players don't always make the best coaches. So you could see a guy like Huddy being a more successful NHL coach than Coffey. But I mean, once again, just like Knoblauch, the results have been excellent with Coffey back there. I think that the Oilers are making much better headman passes ever since Coffey came in across the board. Even Vinny Desharnais, he's not known for his hands at all, but I'm seeing him making better passes than I ever have before. He's being more confident in his puck skills. And I think the message from Coffey to the entire defense is, don't just chip it out. Like, make a play with the puck. I mean, make a smart play, but get it up into the forward's hands as quickly as possible. If you have to go just off the glass and out, that's fine, but don't sacrifice an opportunity to make a play when you have the room to make a pass. And even Darnell Nurse, he is much more known for his skating ability than his passing ability. That's how he gets the puck up ice. And there was an instance where I saw probably the best long range pass that he's ever completed in the NHL, where he sprung Nuge for a breakaway. I'm trying to remember what game it was.
It was on this latest homestand. Was it Minnesota or I might have been Minnesota?
No, it was Anaheim. It was against Anaheim. They fell behind early, and that was the goal that got them back tied. And I was just like, wow, who was that? I thought it was Bush at first, but like, that was Darnell Nurse. He sprung him, and it just was right on the tape. Now, you're not expecting him to make a 150-foot pass every time and send a guy in all alone on a breakaway, but it was really impressive to see. And the fact that the Oilers defensemen are just starting to make more confident plays with the puck, like they're kind of playing in the mold that Paul Coffey was as a defenseman. And, he's probably the best long-range passer in NHL history. So if he can pass some of that wisdom along, then, I mean, that's going to go a long way for this team.
Yeah, like you said, I think maybe there is some empowering going on from Paul, based on how the defensemen have breaking out of the zone and making stretch passes. They're taking an extra second, too, I noticed, to make decisions. The puck isn't as much of a grenade. Especially Bouchard, just to circle back to him, because a lot of his game is taking that extra second to maybe deke around a defenseman, find a pass that is maybe, not present of mind to, someone of lesser skill. His game is just really taken off.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we also have to give a shout out to Mark Stewart, who's had an expanded role since Dave Manson was let go as well. He was originally coaching the penalty kill, and not to say that Dave Manson was bad at his job by any means. I think actually he was really helpful when he first came up from Bakersfield. But you look at a guy like Mark Stewart, he's only been out of the league for a handful of years, and he understands penalty killing in the modern game. Whereas like Manson's been retired for 20 years. And Mark Stewart's probably actually killed penalties against a lot of these top attackers that the Oilers are still going up against. So I think he might understand certain tendencies that players have and can, pass along some guidance to, like, this is what this guy likes to do, or, that guy likes to set up over there. So between those two guys coaching the defense, you have Mark Stewart, who is a completely different defenseman from Paul Coffey. They're almost sort of like the perfect blend, where you have one coach who is the offensive-minded guy in Coffey and is telling them to make more plays with the puck. And you got Stewart, who is helping in what he was a specialist at in the NHL, and that's killing penalties and defending his own end.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute point. Ultimately, it's very difficult to assess because, like you were saying earlier, there was a lot of factors that caused the team to struggle, and I'm wondering if maybe the inverse is true with the Oilers come up, where they have a fresh look and a different mix in terms of strategies and systems from the coaching, but also health from the team, and maybe a little bit of strength of competition. There's so many factors that are playing a part in the Oilers' resurgence that it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but it is easy to make the delineation of the head coach.
And post, the Oilers have been significantly better in virtually every respect from a month ago. But is Connor McDavid returning to full health the single biggest reason the Oilers are on an 8-game heater?
I would say so. I think the rumored Achilles, or not Achilles, oblique injury. Sorry. Yeah, I think that his bread and butter is turning on a dime and making rapid movements, and to hamper that at all really takes away one of the core assets of his game. And the Oilers, they live and die by their top players, so it's a huge factor. So yeah, I would say that of the probably dozen or so reasons for their downfall and then their resurgence, that plays the biggest part.
Yeah, and even though the Oilers struggled out of the gate, McDavid still put up 8 points in his first 5 games. But then, like you said, he suffered that upper body injury that was rumored to be an oblique strain or pull against the Jets. And if you remember, he couldn't play in overtime that game, and then he missed the next 2 games. It was believed to be a 1 to 2 week injury, and he came back after 8 days. And I do believe, though, if it wasn't for the Heritage Classic, he probably would have sat out longer than 2 games. But obviously, he wanted to have that experience. Plus, the Oilers were on a losing streak, so I'm sure he felt that he had to play through it because the team needed him. But Connor McDavid at 50% health is still better than most of the players in the league. And you could just tell that he was playing hurt, though. Like you said, with the he didn't have his normal ability to turn on a dime. He didn't have the same explosiveness to beat defenders wide. It also looked like he was struggling to shoot the puck, and he dropped below a point per game for the first time since his rookie season in 2015-16. But we knew he wasn't going to stay at a 76-point pace all season. And now he finally looks like Connor McDavid again. He's pushing the pace. He's flying around the ice with the puck. He's creating scoring chances at will. And he's even producing enough offense to win games on his own some nights. In fact, last night, McDavid became just the 5th player in NHL history to record double-digit point streaks 13 different times in his career. He also has 25 points during his 10-game point streak, including a pair of assists in the victory over the Blackhawks. So I think McDavid getting back to full health is the single biggest reason for the Oilers' success as of late.
It really is. And, he's climbed from, being in the 90s in the scoring race to now being in the top 10, I think.
Yeah.
He's number 7 as we speak.
I mean, it speaks to like how dominant he's been. And I went and looked over those last 10 games, if anyone's even close to him. The next most points in the league is Kucherov with 18. So McDavid has sailed past him, and I have a feeling he's going to track him down eventually. But, I don't know if you do any individual point predictions for the Oilers, but I predicted McDavid would put up 164 points this season, which is exactly 2 points per game. And I still think if it wasn't for his injury, he would have reached that number. But right now, like you said, he's tied for 7th in league scoring with 38 points in 24 games. That's a 126-point pace in 80 games. How many points do you think he'll finish with this season? And will it be enough to win his 4th consecutive Art Ross trophy?
Yeah, I think the Art Ross is his to lose. I'm really not concerned about anyone else making a run for that. Nikita Kucherov does lead the league with 47 points, but that won't persist, especially because of how middling the Tampa Bay Lightning have been this season. He will win the Art Ross. He will, probably also snag the Ted Lindsay. Yeah, I think that 130 points seems about right for Connor at this point, based on the start he had, which to recover to still be a 130-point player is absurd.
Yeah, I mean, he's the only player that's done it in the last 27 years. And the fact that he still has a shot at it after, playing through an injury early in the year, it speaks to his dominance. I think he can even push it a little higher. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the 135 to 140 range. It's we know that he turns it up another notch or 2 notches down the stretch run. So I fully expect that he's going to be right around 2 points per game for the final 40-ish games of the season. And I mean, that's when he's gearing up for the playoffs. So I think that he'll take it up to another level at that point. But yeah, it's the scoring title. I think that he'll track Kucherov down as well. Like I said, he's got 3 games in hand on him. So let's even say that he puts up 5 points in those 3 games. Now you're up to 43. You're only 4 points behind Kucherov. You're going to make up that ground. Like, it might take him until January to pass him in the standings, but I have a feeling that once he passes him, no one will be catching him for the rest of the way.
I think the biggest factor in how many points he gets over the next 56 games is how many he wants. We see that when the Oilers are maybe, in danger of running up the score a little bit, he doesn't exactly go hard and his minutes are curtailed somewhat. So I think we often see McDavid, as Oilers fans who watch him as often as we do, we see him forfeit some scoring opportunities when an offensive press isn't needed. So it really depends on what he wants to do, which sounds a little bit conceited, but it's true. The sky's the limit for this player.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it, like you said, he finished with 153 points last year. Other than Draisaitl, he was 40 points ahead of his next closest non-teammate. There were two players that finished with 113 last year, and I believe those were Pasternak and Kucherov. So that's the kind of dominance he is over every other superstar in the league. And, realistically, in a healthy year, no one can contend with McDavid. I mean, I think that he's won the last 3 Art Ross trophies. I think he should be able to win the next 3 as well. You look at him, if he does win it this year, that would be his 6th, which would tie him for the second most in NHL history with Gordie Howe and Mario Lemieux. You look at Wayne Gretzky stands alone in first with 10. How close do you think McDavid can get to Gretzky in terms of Art Ross trophies?
Ooh, that's really difficult.
Do you think he's got another 4 in him after this year to tie the record?
I want to say yes. I'm going to definitively say yes. But I mean, health, especially once you creep up to 30, can be such a factor in that. But really, that's what it depends on is how healthy he can stay,
yeah.
and ultimately, is he on the same team with Leon Draisaitl, which definitely gives him a bit of an advantage.
Well, I'm definitely hoping so, but to me, he should be able to hold on to the best player in the world title, at least I would think until 30, 31. And, by that point, maybe you've seen some younger guys like Bedard or even a couple of players who haven't come in the league yet. Maybe it's Jack Hughes. Some of those younger guys come up and start to push him by that point because they'll be entering their prime and Connor will be sort of leaving his prime. But even in his 30s, I still fully expect him to be a consistent 100-point player. He might not be putting up 140, 150 points anymore, but he's going to be a dominant offensive player for a long time.
I think a good comparison is Sidney Crosby. Had it not been for McDavid entering the league, Sidney Crosby probably would have been the NHL's best player until, maybe as late as 2019 or 2020. But McDavid entered the league in 15-16, and in my estimation was the best player by 2017.
Yeah, at least the best offensive player in the world by his second year in the league.
Exactly. And, granted, Bedard is here. Unless a player of that caliber enters the league, I think McDavid's reign at the top will be a little bit longer than Crosby's, just based on that.
Yeah, I think now that it's been enough years have passed, you can say that by 2006, 2007, which was Crosby's second year, he ascended to that title of the best offensive player in the world. We'll just talk about offense for the purpose of this conversation. And then he probably held that title for 10 years. Now, there were brief moments where Ovechkin was either with him or might have briefly overtaken it. But for the most part, Crosby was the best offensive player in the world from 2006 to 2016. And then, like you said, now in Connor's second year, he came in and took the crown and has basically held it now for the past 8 years. But I don't see any real threats to him in the immediate future. Like, could Bedard become the best offensive player in the world eventually? Yeah, I think he's probably trending in that area. But I don't think that he will ascend to the top as quickly as maybe Crosby or McDavid did.
No, I think that's a very difficult bar. The NHL right now is as star-studded as I've seen it since I've been watching the game. There's so many great
superstars
players
on every team.
Yeah, I think during the 2000s, early 2010s, the star power of the league wasn't nearly what it is today. So,
well, think of it in the early 2000s, before Crosby and Ovechkin came into the league, and Gretzky and Lemieux had retired. You had Yager, who was probably the de facto best player in the world. And then you had guys like Forsberg and Iginla, who were sort of right there with him, maybe a step or two below. But the league was in desperate need of star power. And then you had Ovechkin and Crosby, who kind of saved the league coming out of that lockout. But ever since then, it's just been a constant growth of more elite skill coming into the league every year.
There really has. I think McDavid, just to circle back to your original question, I think he probably will win 4 more Art Ross trophies. But yeah, again, health being the biggest factor, and we still don't really know what the ceiling is on Connor Bedard.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even if McDavid doesn't break the record, like let's say he gets to 8 or 9 Art Ross trophies, the fact that he even got that close to Wayne Gretzky is remarkable.
It is. It's hard to fathom that, he's in the same territory, considering, it's a triple hard salary cap and there's 32 teams. It's even more impressive.
But the one other factor is that Gretzky's career and Lemieux's career lined up pretty evenly. Like Wayne is 5 years older, but still, like those two guys played against each other for the bulk of their careers. McDavid hasn't had an equal yet. He hasn't had his Lemieux, and maybe that will be Bedard, but there still hasn't been a player who's come in and challenged him for Art Ross trophies the way Lemieux eventually did, taking the Art Ross from Wayne, and then Wayne would take it back from him in the late 80s, early 90s. But after, years of dominance of Wayne just owning that trophy. But right now it seems like it's Connor's, and I don't see, like I said, in a healthy year, he should be able to finish 20, even 30 points ahead of the next closest competitor.
Yeah, it's not close.
No. And speaking of offensive stars, we've also seen Evan Bouchard take a massive step forward here in his third full NHL season, emerging as an elite offensive defenseman. He's on pace for an incredible 95 points this year. He was drafted 10th overall by the Oilers back in 2018 to be an offensive threat on the back end. But did you ever envision him reaching this level of production?
I did, actually. In the offseason, I was speaking with a few friends, and I thought that, Bouchard was going to be a point per game this season, and there was definitely some pushback on that. But I think a lot of it is circumstance. He's already an offensively gifted defenseman, but just the fact that he's on probably the greatest power play the game has ever seen, with 2 of the best players in the NHL, skill and circumstance are aligning to a point where he probably should be a point per game, and it really shouldn't be a big surprise.
Exactly. It's hard to believe that the Oilers haven't had a defenseman crack 50 points since Sheldon Surrey in 2008-2009. That was 15 years ago, and Bouchard is already at 30 points. Like, he's going to sail past 50 points by the All-Star break. So I thought that I was having a reasonable projection before the season, saying that he would get 64 points. And here he is now. I think that 70 would be at least a lock at this point, right?
It would. To get more specific, I said that Bouchard would have more points than Connor Bedard this season. And
you might still be right about that. I don't know 100% if you'll be right on that, but he does have the benefit of playing with some pretty special players. Just to take this back to Paul Coffey, who's coaching Bouchard, he had the luxury of playing with Gretzky in his prime in Edmonton, and then playing with Lemieux in his prime in Pittsburgh. And if you ever wonder why Paul Coffey retired as, I think, 6th all-time in assists in NHL history, not for defensemen, but when he retired, I believe he was 6th in NHL history for any player. Having the opportunity to play with both of those players played a huge factor in it. And Bouchard, I'm sure he would be an offensive star wherever he went. I know the New York Rangers were apparently interested in him prior to the 2018 draft, and I'm sure that I think Bob McKenzie actually had him projected to go 4th overall that year, but he ended up falling to the Oilers at 10th, and man, has that worked out, because after a few years of being patient with the kid, he has grown into a superstar producer on the back end, and like we said, getting to play on arguably, if not definitively, the best power play in NHL history with McDavid and Draisaitl. We're talking about a player who is pushing for 90 plus points as a D-man.
Exactly. I think arguably, I can't think of a defenseman right now who has a better point shot. I
think he probably has the best point shot in the league at this point.
It's accurate, while, hitting nearly 100, kilometers an hour,
miles
corners. Sorry, it was miles.
100 miles an hour. Yeah.
100 miles an hour. Going bar down. It's getting really close to supplanting Draisaitl's one-timer as the biggest weapon on the Oilers' power play.
I believe he scored on 3 straight shots recently. I mean, not all in the same game, but he took 3 shots and they all went in the net consecutively. Now, the Oilers, I mean, think of what they have on the power play. Like we talked about it, best player in the world in McDavid, arguably one of the 2 or 3 best players in the world in Draisaitl. I think he's the second best player in the world, but with an unreal one-timer and incredible playmaking abilities as well. You've got Nugent Hopkins, who's so skilled and sure-handed with the puck, and then you've got Hyman, who's like, a Tasmanian devil in front of the net, banging in every loose puck and tipping in every puck that's near him. And adding Evan Bouchard now to that mix, who can rip the puck from the blue line. I mean, they have so many different options and weapons on that power play. It's just, not to take anything away from Tyson Barrie, but anyone who thought that the power play would drop off when they lost him, I mean, Bouchard has come in and made it even better.
Exactly. And it's not just the fact that everyone on the power play is so good. It's that there's no redundancy. Everyone has a different role, and they just mesh together so well.
Exactly. I mean, you got, like we said, Nuge in the bumper spot, Hyman as the net front presence. Leon is set up for that one-timer, and even though the opposition knows it's coming, you'd be surprised how many times he scores from there, and such a sharp angle too. A lot of them are just like right above the goal line. And of course, you've got McDavid flying around the offensive zone, creating magic. I mean, he can score and create plays from just about anywhere, but having that big shot from the point, I mean, that gives me a lot of confidence that this power play is going to be hovering around 30% for years to come.
I think so as well. And just to build off that fact, the Oilers have killed 24 of 25 penalties of late. So
I got a message from
the biggest factor.
I got a message from a friend of mine last night who is we were talking about it. It's 30 of their last 31 penalties they've killed off.
I mean, that's, to think that would happen to this team was unthinkable.
Where it was, yeah. I mean, literally, they have had the best penalty kill in the league over this recent stretch. And I think Oilers fans would have settled for middle of the pack on the PK.
Exactly. If your penalty kill and your power play are clicking at this rate, it's no wonder the team looks borderline unbeatable these last number of games. Yeah,
and I mean, just to take this back to Knobloch for a second, I dug into some of the numbers of all the teams since he took over. And this tweet's a little outdated now. It was from December 9th, which was about 5 days ago. But at the time, and these numbers have even gone up since because the Oilers have kept winning, but they were 4th in the league this is just since November 13th, I should say, since he took over behind the bench. They were 4th in the league in points percentage. I believe they're up to 3rd now. Goals for per game, they were 1st. Goals against per game, they were 13th. I believe that's climbed up now as well. Power play, they were 3rd in the league, and penalty kill, they were 6th. So that penalty kill is right at the top. Power play in the top 3. I mean, 1st in the league in goals, and defensively, they're close to top 10. I mean, when you're scoring as much as the Oilers are, and you're only giving up 1 or 2 goals a night. I mean, Stuart Skinner has a 1.7 goals against average over this run. He's played 7 of those 8 games, and in the one game Pickard played, he only allowed a single goal. So they're giving up basically under 2 goals a game, and they're scoring over 4 goals a game, and that's a pretty good recipe for an 8-game winning streak.
Yeah, I mean, you hope it can continue, and
and we know it's not. We know they're not going to continually average 4.5 goals a game for the rest of the season. But I mean, I don't think that it's going to drop off significantly either. I think this is a team that should be probably right around that 4 goals a game mark.
And it's good to know that, we don't need to score 4 or 5 goals a game just to have a chance at winning. The fact that we've stopped the bleeding defensively is great. I know the goals will come, but it's a matter of, once this, hot streak dies down and we regress to the mean a little bit, where does that settle?
Yeah, like to give you an example, last year when they scored 325 goals in 82 games, I mean, there was only one other team, I believe, that cracked 300 goals, and they were just barely over. It was the Bruins, and the Oilers were 20 plus goals past them. But 325 goals is 3.96 goals per game. So for them to average 4 goals a game, you're talking about equaling the level that they were at last year when McDavid had his 153-point season, Draisaitl had his 128-point season. The Oilers had the best power play in NHL history. So to even be in that category where they're producing at the same rate is phenomenal. I don't know if it's, like we said, sustainable for the whole year, but you'd like to see them at least closer to that 4-goal game. But I don't think anyone, like I said, is expecting them to get 4 goals every single night.
No, definitely not.
But I mean, if they can keep cutting down the goals against as much as they have, even if it climbs up a little bit, that'll be a big factor. And just to finish up on Bouchard, because he's such an important part of the power play and can produce these huge numbers, how concerned are you with his defensive ability? Like, do you think that he needs to get a lot better in his own end, or can you kind of live with some of the mistakes because of what he can bring at the other end of the ice?
I think he has improved, and especially at his cap hit. It's something that you can't really gripe about too much. I mean, he's already a top 3-4, let's say, offensive defenseman in the NHL as of right now. And
making $3.9 million?
Exactly. So, I mean, we have to be really careful with, our complaints and our expectations of a player producing what he is. I think,
about,
Sorry.
No. I was going to say, think about what that next paycheck's going to look like in the summer of 2025.
Oh, he's going to get paid. We're beyond that.
I think we're talking about Darnell Nurse money.
We are, absolutely. I was prepared to give him, an 8x8 in the summer.
I think they should. I think they should try to extend him. If he would do 8x8, do that all day, because I'll tell you what, if he has a 90-point season or back-to-back 90-point seasons, just like we said, if he's able to continue on at this level, then that contract is looking like close to double digits. So get him signed as quickly as possible.
He'll be using Cale Makar as a comparable.
Yeah.
So that's not a great position for us. Yeah, the sooner we can get him committed long-term, the better. But, it's up to him and his agent to see if they want to squeeze what they can out of the Oilers.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, I think for me, yes, he might only be average defensively, but because he has such an elite skill, I can overlook the odd mistake, because you're not going to have the perfect two-way defender when they can put up that type of offense. It's just it's such an incredible quality to have that he can produce points at this clip. So if you want him to be the perfect two-way defenseman, he's never going to be that. But you'd like to think that he will also not have a glaring mistake every single game that leads to either a goal against or a scoring chance for the other team. It's just a matter of cutting those down and just sort of taking away the grade A chances, I would say.
And I've noticed that he's really cut down on those mistakes, and he's actually made some pretty impressive defensive plays in the last week or so, and I think that's to be commended. And he's not going to be prime Adam Larson defensively, but we don't need him to be that.
No, and look, I mean, I'm sure Mark Stewart is working with him on some defensive areas of hey, you can clean up your game a little bit here, or just if you're in a tough spot, this is what you should do. But he doesn't, like I said, need to be the Chris Russell type, the Adam Larson type, who's completely committed to the defensive side of the puck. I mean, as long as he's average to passable in his own end, that's enough for me. I don't think he needs to be like a defensive stalwart or anything.
Of course not. No.
And while the team in front of him has drastically improved, Stuart Skinner has also shaken off his rough start to the season with consistently stellar goaltending over the streak. I already kind of talked about him, but he has a 7-0-0 record with a 1.70 goals against average and a .935 save percentage, as well as one shutout in his last 7 games. Post, I know that this sample size isn't the largest that you'd like to see from a goaltender, but Skinner really appears to have regained his all-star form from a year ago. And I just want to know, how comfortable are you with Skinner and Calvin Pickard between the pipes going forward? Or do you think that they still need to bring in another goaltender?
if we have designs on winning the Stanley Cup, I would like to see them maybe explore an upgrade in the backup goaltender position. But
yeah,
me
too.
Confident.
I don't think they're getting a starter. That's the thing. Like, I mean, Stuart Skinner is going to be their starter, but someone who can sort of like give him a little more relief.
I think that we can win the Stanley Cup with Stuart Skinner as a starting goaltender. So I'm not too concerned about him. It's more so.
His critics will say that you can't, though, after last year. But I mean, think about it. Like, they really rode him hard last year, and he came in basically from the start of the season and played more games than he was expected. We thought it was going to be like a 30-50 split with Campbell playing 50, Stewart playing 30, and it ended up being the opposite. It was like Campbell who was around 30 and Skinner who was over 50. And when you look at that, he was probably a little worn out going through the rigors of his first NHL season and kind of wore down by the second round against Vegas.